I fell on the icy sidewalk. Under the guise of caring, my niece took my laundromat. But I found a way to take everything back. I should have known better than to walk down Maple Street that morning without my cane. The wind had sharpened overnight, the kind of February cold that makes the windows rattle in their frames and turns every puddle into a glassy trap. I'd been meaning to pick up milk and a loaf of rye from the corner store, and I thought, oh, it's just a few blocks, I'll be careful. But ice doesn't much care about careful. 1 minute I was upright. The next I was staring at the gray sky with snowflakes drifting down like confetti for a celebration I hadn't agreed to attend. My hips screamed, my elbow throbbed, and for a moment I just lay there, the world spinning, the taste of iron in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. I remember thinking, this is how old women end up in hospital beds, with flowers in plastic vases and visitors who talk in hushed tones. It was Marsha who found me. She'd been driving by, her bright blue sedan pulling up to the curb like an angel in patent leather boots. "Auntie!" she cried, rushing out, her scarf trailing behind her. She fussed over me, brushed snow from my coat, and in a few short minutes had me bundled into her car. "You can't stay alone while you heal," she insisted, eyes wide with concern. "You'll move in with me, just until you're back on your feet." And in that moment I thought, how lucky I am to have family who cares. The first days at her house felt like stepping into another life. Her home smelled faintly of cinnamon candles, not bleach and starch like my laundromat always did. She laid out thick blankets on the couch, brought me steaming bowls of chicken soup, and ran out to the pharmacy for my pain medication before I even asked. At night, she'd peek in on me like I was a child again. "You need your rest, Auntie," she'd whisper. There was something sweet in being cared for after so many years of being the one who cared. I'd spent decades bent over washers and dryers, mending buttons, pressing shirts just so, keeping everything spotless and humming. My hands knew the language of fabric, of soap suds, of customers' quiet confessions while they folded their towels. No one ever asked if I was tired. But here was Marsha, smoothing the blanket over my knees, saying, "Don't worry about a thing." I wanted to believe her concern was pure, and maybe for a time it was. She made me hot cocoa the way I liked it, with just a pinch of nutmeg. She showed me how her new washing machine sang a little tune when it finished its cycle, nothing like the sturdy grumble of my old Maytags, but cheerful in its own way. At night, I'd sit by her window watching the streetlights glow on the snow. The city seemed softer from her living room, quieter. It almost lulled me into thinking maybe it was a blessing in disguise, that fall on the ice. Perhaps it was the world's way of telling me to pause, to let someone else carry the weight for a while. But dear, there was also a restlessness inside me, a hum under my skin. I wasn't used to sitting still. My whole life had been movement, scrubbing, folding, sweeping, ringing up customers with a smile. To sit wrapped in blankets while someone else tended to things, it felt nice for a day or two, but soon enough it felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. You can't ignore the pinch forever. Still, I told myself, patience. Heal first, then you'll go back. The laundromat wasn't going anywhere. My customers would understand. And Marsha, bless her heart, seemed so eager to make me comfortable. She even set a vase of carnations by my bed, though she knows I've always preferred daisies. That first days passed in a blur of soups, naps, and pills that left me drowsy. I let her take my laundry basket, let her fetch my slippers. I told myself not to feel guilty for enjoying a little rest. After all, hadn't I earned it? But deep down, under the warmth of the blankets and the sweetness of her cocoa, something unsettled me. It was in the way she locked the laundromat's ledger in her desk drawer when I asked about it. In the quickness with which she said, "Don't worry, Auntie, I'll check in on things for you." At the time I thought nothing of it. Or maybe I just didn't want to think too hard. My body hurt, my bones ached, and I told myself she was just being thoughtful. The truth, though I see it now, was that my fall on the ice wasn't the only slip I had. I let myself believe I could rest, that someone else could hold my life's work while I healed. And that, my dear, was the beginning of everything that followed. It was on the fourth morning after my fall when I first heard it. I had just managed to shuffle into the kitchen, leaning on the counter while the kettle hissed. The sunlight spilled across Marsha's neat little dining table, her polished fruit bowl glistening like it belonged in a magazine. I reached for the dish towel draped over the oven handle, old habits die hard, and began folding it neatly into thirds. That's when she turned from the sink, suds dripping from her hands, and said it in that light sing-song voice of hers. "Auntie, you can rest now. The laundromat is not your problem." It sounded almost like a lullaby, soft and kind, but there was something sharp tucked inside those words, like a pin hidden in a cushion. "The laundromat is not your problem." I smiled, pretending not to notice. "Oh, I wasn't thinking about the laundromat." I lied, though in truth I was. I thought about the machines humming without me, about Mr. Jenkins who always forgot to empty his pockets, about Mrs. Alvarez who trusted me to bleach her husband's work shirts just right. I thought about the key that had hung on my wrist for decades, heavy with more than brass. It held years of my life. Marsha waved her hand dismissively, drying it on a dish towel. "You've worked too hard for too long. Let me handle things for once. You deserve to just rest." Rest. Such a sweet word when you're tired. Such a bitter one when it's used to tuck you neatly out of the way. I wanted to argue, but I saw the determination in her eyes. She wasn't asking, she was telling. So I sat down in the chair she pulled out for me, and she poured the tea, her movements quick and decisive. All through breakfast she kept repeating little things. "Don't get up, Auntie, I'll clear the plates. No need to make your bed, I already did it. Don't trouble yourself with the mail, I'll take care of it." Each kindness was another thread being gently wound around me. First it felt like comfort, but soon enough it began to feel like a net. That evening, when I suggested we take a walk down to the laundromat just so I could peek inside, she laughed lightly, as though I'd asked for something silly. "You're still limping, Auntie. What if you fall again? You stay here cozy and safe. I'll go tomorrow and make sure everything's fine." Her words should have reassured me. Instead, they settled heavy in my chest. I found myself remembering my younger days, when no one had told me to rest. When my hands were raw from scrubbing and my back ached from lifting wet bundles. But I pushed on because I had to. Because people were counting on me. I used to dream of someone saying, "Sit down, let me do it." And here it was finally offered, and I didn't want it. Funny how life works that way, isn't it? The days blurred into a strange rhythm. Marsha went out often, checking on things, she said, while I stayed home, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. She came back with papers tucked into folders, with her phone buzzing and her voice hushed when she took calls in the other room. I asked once gently, "Is everything all right at the laundromat?" Her answer came too quickly. "Of course, Auntie. Don't worry your head. I've got it under control." Something about the way she said it, sharp, final, made me press my lips together and nod. But my heart knew better. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I thought about my first day at the laundromat, back when my late husband and I scraped together enough savings to buy the place. It wasn't much back then, 2 old machines and a cracked linoleum floor. But we polished it up, painted the walls sky blue, and I learned every hum and rattle of those machines like they were my children. Through the years, that laundromat kept us afloat, sent my boy to school, and gave me a reason to rise each morning. Now to be told it was not my problem, as if it were some burden I should be grateful to put down, cut me deeper than I let on. One afternoon, I hobbled into the living room where she was perched on the sofa with her papers. "Maybe I could stop by tomorrow just for a little while," I ventured. She didn't even look up. "Auntie, no. Please. You're not well enough. Besides, I've already spoken with the staff. They know I'm in charge now. They don't expect you there." The words hit me like a slap. In charge now? I swallowed hard, lowering myself into the armchair. I see, I murmured, though what I saw was the shadow of something bigger creeping over my life. After she left that evening, I shuffled to the window and watched the street lamps flicker on. Snow was beginning to fall again, soft and relentless. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "Not my problem," as if saying it out loud might make me believe it. But I didn't believe it. Not for a second. Because deep inside I knew. When someone tells you to rest too firmly, it isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's the first step in taking something from you. And that, dear, was the beginning of the sting behind her sweetness. The gentle restriction that would grow tighter with every passing day. The truth doesn't always come crashing in like thunder. Sometimes it creeps little by little, until one day it stands in front of you, bold as brass, and you can't look away. For me, that day came on a Wednesday morning a week after my fall. Marsha had left early, saying she had errands. I was sitting at her kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of tea, staring at the steam that had long since disappeared. The silence of her house felt different from mine. Too neat, too curated, like a photograph in a catalog. My laundromat had always been alive with sound. Machines humming, dryers tumbling, customers chatting. Even the silence there felt warmer. I shuffled to the window, restless, and that's when I saw him, Mr. Carter, my neighbor from 2 streets over. He was standing by his truck, a box of laundry soap in his arms, looking puzzled. I opened the door and waved. "Morning, Henry," I called. He crossed the street, his boots crunching on the thin crust of ice. "Morning, ma'am. You doing all right? Haven't seen you at the shop lately." I told him about the fall, about staying with Marsha, and tried to smile. But then he frowned, shifting the box in his hands. "Funny thing, though. I went by yesterday, and the girl at the counter said it was under new management. Your niece. That true?" The words knocked the air from me. "New management?" I repeated. He nodded. Said she was the new owner now. I didn't think you'd sold it, but she was acting real official. My knees wobbled and I gripped the door frame. "Thank you, Henry." I managed, my voice tight. "You take care now." When I shut the door, my heart was pounding. I sank into the nearest chair, the old wood creaking under me. Owner. No one could own that laundromat but me. Not without my signature, not without my say-so. Marsha came home an hour later, her cheeks pink from the cold, her arms full of groceries. I waited until she had set everything down before I asked, as calmly as I could, "Marsha, what's this I hear about you running the laundromat?" She didn't even flinch. Just brushed a strand of hair from her face and said, "Oh, Auntie, it's just easier this way. While you're recovering, someone needs to take charge. The staff needed clarity." Clarity. My voice was sharper than I meant it to be. "That place is mine, Marsha. It has always been mine." She sighed, as though I were a child insisting on a bedtime story. "I know, Auntie, I know. But think of it as temporary. The paperwork's been handled, the accounts updated. Customers will get used to seeing me. It's just more convenient." Convenient. The word dripped like vinegar. I stared at her, my chest tight. "You had no right," I whispered. That's when she said it. The words that burned hotter than the fall on the ice ever could. "You're too old for this. Too old." Just like that, she pushed decades of my life into a drawer and slammed it shut. I felt something snap inside me, quiet but undeniable. Too old. Was I too old when I lifted heavy baskets for young mothers? Too old when I stayed open late for the mechanic who needed his coveralls clean by dawn? Too old when I fixed machines with my own 2 hands because no one else would? I stood, my hands trembling on the table. "You may think I'm old, Marsha," I said softly, "but I am not finished." She smiled a little, condescending, and patted my hand as if I were a child fussing about bedtime. "Rest, Auntie. It's better this way." I pulled my hand back, but I said nothing more. Not then. My bones still ached from the fall, and my head spun with the weight of her betrayal. But inside, deep down where she couldn't see, a spark had lit. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her words kept circling, too old, too old. I thought of the laundromat, of the smell of soap and steam, of the jingling bell above the door when customers walked in. I thought of all the times people trusted me with their clothes, their linens, their very lives folded into fabric. And I thought of how easily Marsha dismissed it all, as if it were nothing more than a burden she was relieving me of. But it wasn't a burden. It was me. I realized then that my fall on the ice had been just that, a fall. Temporary. But what Marsha was doing was permanent. If I let her, she'd take everything I'd built, everything I'd poured myself into, and sell it for parts, leaving me with nothing but blankets and tea. And so while she slept soundly in the room down the hall, I made myself a promise. I would not let her erase me. Not with her soft words, not with her papers, not with her claims of convenience. She might have thought I was too old, but I still had fight left in me. And soon, sweetheart, I would prove it. After that day when Marsha said those words, "You're too old for this," I carried them like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, cold, always there when I reached for comfort. I sat in her neat little living room, surrounded by her scented candles and soft rugs, and my mind drifted back to a very different kind of place. The laundromat. That shop wasn't just four walls and some machines. It was the heartbeat of my life. Every corner held a memory. I could close my eyes and smell the starch, the faint tang of bleach, the sweet powder of fabric softener that lingered even after closing time. I remember the early days when my late husband and I scraped together every penny we could to buy the place. It wasn't much then, just 2 dented washers, 1 dryer that rattled like a tin can, and a floor so worn it showed the path of every customer who'd walked through. But I saw potential in it. He did too, though he used to joke that I loved that laundromat more than I loved him. I always told him, "Don't be silly. You both keep me going in different ways." We painted the walls ourselves, sky blue with white trim, though the paint dripped in spots and the brushes left streaks. I thought it looked beautiful. The front window had a crack in the corner, but when the morning sun poured through it, the whole place seemed to glow. Day by day we built it up. 1 machine at a time, 1 customer at a time. And oh, the customers, they weren't just people dropping off clothes. They were threads in the fabric of my life. There was Mrs. Alvarez, who came in every Monday with her husband's shirts. He worked in construction, and she always asked me to bleach them just enough to keep them white without fraying the collars. She'd sit by the window while I worked, telling me stories about her garden, about the marigolds her mother had taught her to grow. There was young Tommy, the mechanic's apprentice, who'd bring in coveralls so caked in grease I sometimes wondered if the machine would spit them back out. He'd grin sheepishly, hand me a chocolate bar and say, "For your trouble, ma'am." He's the one who first called me ma'am, and it made me laugh. I wasn't 30 yet, but in his eyes I was already someone to respect. And then there were the soldiers. Fort Jefferson wasn't far, and every now and then a young man in uniform would walk in, clutching a duffel bag. Their shirts smelled faintly of starch from training, and sometimes their hands shook when they pulled coins from their pockets. I always told them, "Don't you worry about the quarters, just bring it here." More than once I slipped a sandwich into their bag along with their folded laundry. Some of them came back after deployment. Some didn't. I remember every face. The machines themselves became companions. I knew their voices, each rattle and hum. Washer 3 always groaned on the spin cycle, but if you gave it a firm tap on the side, it settled down like a stubborn child. Dryer 2 had a hot streak. It ran too warm, so I used it for towels instead of shirts. People laughed when I talked to the machines, but I swore they listened. They kept me company on long nights when I worked alone, the rhythmic churning like a lullaby. There were long hours, yes. My back ached, my fingers cracked from the bleach, and some nights I fell asleep at the counter with the ledger open under my cheek. but I wouldn't trade a single day. That laundromat gave me more than a livelihood. It gave me purpose. I remember once during a storm the power went out in the whole block. The laundromat was dark, the machines silent. I lit candles and left the door unlocked, just in case someone needed shelter. A family came in, soaked to the bone, their little girl shivering. We sat together in the glow of those candles, sharing a thermos of coffee, waiting for the storm to pass. When the lights finally flickered back, the little girl clapped her hands and said, "Your laundromat is magic." I've carried that with me all these years. And it wasn't just about customers. That shop saw my life unfold. I celebrated birthdays there, with cupcakes on the counter and balloons tied to the door handle. I wept there too the night my husband passed, because I couldn't bear to sit alone in the quiet house. The laundromat was where I stitched my grief into the steady rhythm of work, folding sheets until the ache in my chest softened. To think of Marsha calling it convenient, as if it were nothing but a chore, well, it was like she'd called my very life a burden. She didn't know what those walls had seen. She didn't know the history that hummed through the pipes and wires. Too old, she said. Maybe my bones creaked more now, maybe I walked slower, but inside I was still the woman who could run 3 machines, press a shirt, and ring up a customer all at once. Age doesn't erase ability. It just teaches you where your strength comes from. That night, as I sat on the edge of Marsha's guest bed, I pressed my hands together and whispered, "I am not too old. I am not finished." The words felt strange but strong, like sewing a new seam into fabric that had begun to fray. The laundromat was more than a business. It was my legacy, my love, my proof that I mattered in this world. And I wasn't about to let anyone, not even family, sweep it away as though it were just dirty laundry waiting to be forgotten. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the first crack appeared in Marsha's carefully polished story. The kind of afternoon when the sky looks washed out, pale gray with no promise of sun, and you feel the weight of winter pressing against the windows. I was sitting by her front door, wrapped in one of her fleece throws, waiting for the mail. I told her I liked to fetch it myself, though truth be told, it was one of the last small freedoms she still allowed me. That's when I saw a familiar figure come trudging up the sidewalk. It was Tommy, the mechanic's boy who used to bring me his grease-stained coveralls. Only he wasn't a boy anymore. His shoulders were broad now, his hands rough, his face lined by long hours in the garage. But he still had that same sheepish smile I remembered. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his cap. "Heard you'd had a fall. I figured I'd stop by, see how you were holding up." My heart lifted. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen, being remembered outside of Marsha's tight circle of control. "Tommy, well, aren't you kind? Come in, come in." He stepped inside, shifting awkwardly on her polished floorboards, clearly uncomfortable in the neatness of her home. After a bit of small talk, he scratched the back of his neck. I wanted to ask you about something, if it's all right." "Of course," I said, though my stomach tightened. "Well," he began slowly, "I was down at the laundromat last week. Had a stack of rags from the shop. But the bill she gave me, your niece, didn't add up. She charged me double, near triple what you used to. Said it was new policy." My chest went cold. "Triple?" He nodded, pulling a crumpled slip of paper from his jacket pocket. "I didn't want to make a fuss, but I figured you ought to know. You always treated us fair. This here, well, it don't feel like you." I smoothed out the receipt with trembling fingers. The handwriting wasn't mine, though my name was printed at the top as if it still belonged to me. I looked up at Tommy and forced a smile. "Thank you for showing me, dear. I'll look into it." He gave me a long look like he knew more than he said, then tipped his cap again. "You take care of yourself, ma'am." And with that, he was gone, leaving me clutching the slip of paper like a warning bell. That night, when Marsha came home, I wanted to confront her. I wanted to hold up the receipt and demand an explanation. but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I tucked it into my cardigan pocket and said nothing. Something told me I needed to wait to watch. And sure enough, just a few days later, another clue found me. I was dozing in the armchair, the evening news murmuring in the background, when the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Jenkins, one of my oldest customers. She stood on the porch bundled in her heavy coat, her breath puffing clouds in the cold. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. I needed to show you something." She pulled an envelope from her handbag and pressed it into my hands. Inside were 3 receipts, all with my signature scrawled neatly across the bottom. Only they weren't mine. The loops were too wide, the slant too sharp. A forgery, plain as day to anyone who'd seen me sign my name 1,000 times before. "I thought maybe you'd changed the way you signed," she whispered. "But it didn't sit right with me. So I came straight here." I felt heat rising to my cheeks, a mixture of anger and shame. "Thank you, dear. You did the right thing." She squeezed my hand. "We all know that shop is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Then she left, her footsteps fading into the night. I sat there long after she'd gone, staring at those forged signatures. My hands shook, but not from age this time, from fury. It wasn't enough for Marsha to take over the business. She was wearing my very name like a mask, pretending to be me, bending the trust one had built over decades. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing Marsha's words over and over. "You're too old for this." But if I were truly too old, too weak, too finished, then why did she need to steal my name to keep the place running? Because it wasn't hers. It never could be. And somewhere she knew it. The next morning I made myself a promise. I might not have my strength back yet, but I still had my wits. And I would use them. I would gather proof piece by piece, until there was no room left for her lies. The suspicions had begun. Soon they would grow into certainty. And when they did, I vowed I would not be silent. It was late one evening when the truth came to me. Not with thunder or shouting, but in a whisper. The house was quiet. Marsha had gone out again, saying something about meeting with potential buyers for new detergent suppliers, though her tone carried that tightness I'd learned to recognize. I sat alone in the living room, the hum of her refrigerator the only sound. I was turning over the forged receipts in my hands when a soft knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find Clara, one of my longest employees. She'd been with me for nearly 15 years, since she was barely out of high school. A small woman, quick on her feet, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She stood there clutching her scarf, her breath puffing in the cold night air. "Auntie," she said, voice low. "I didn't know where else to go." I ushered her in quickly, glancing over my shoulder as if Marsha might appear out of the shadows. Clara perched on the edge of the armchair, twisting her scarf in her hands. I could see she was nervous. "What is it, dear?" I asked, my heart already bracing. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's going to sell it. The laundromat. All the machines, everything. She's been talking with some man who runs second-hand equipment shops. She wants to unload it all for cheap." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Sell it?" Clara nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "She says it's outdated, not worth much. But, Auntie, we both know those machines still run. You've kept them alive better than anyone. She doesn't care. She just wants fast money." My hands trembled in my lap. I had braced myself for lies, for small betrayals. But this? To sell the very bones of my life for scraps. It was unthinkable. Clara reached for my hand, her fingers warm and tight. I couldn't stay quiet. "We all know it's yours. Everyone knows. But she's acting like you're already gone." Those words landed harder than the fall on the ice ever had. Already gone. That's what it felt like, Marsha treating me not as though I'd slipped on a patch of ice, but as though I'd slipped out of existence. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. Thank you for telling me, Clara. You did the right thing. She nodded quickly, relief in her eyes. I'll stand by you, Auntie. Whatever you need. After she left, I sat in the dim light of the living room, staring at the shadows flickering on the wall. My hips still ached from the fall, my bones weary, but the ache inside my chest was sharper. Betrayal always cuts deeper when it comes from family. I thought of all the nights I had locked up the laundromat, jingling the keys in my pocket, humming to myself. I thought of the pride I felt the day I paid off the last loan. The way I'd stood in the middle of the shop and whispered, "We did it." Now Marsha wanted to strip it bare, sell it for pennies, erase everything I'd built. It was then, sitting in that quiet house, that I realized something. The fall on the ice had hurt my body, yes, but this betrayal, this cut into my very soul. My hip would heal. But if I let her do this, I'd never heal from it. The thought made me sit up straighter. The pain in my bones didn't matter. I couldn't let this go. Not for myself, not for the people who trusted me, not for the years folded into every corner of that laundromat. The betrayal had broken my heart, but it had also done something else. It had lit a fire. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, the sound of Clara's whisper repeating in my mind. She's going to sell it. I stared at the ceiling and knew deep down that the time for silence was over. If Marsha thought I was too old to fight, she was about to find out how wrong she was. The night I returned to the laundromat, the air was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Marsha had gone to some dinner with friends, her heels clicking on the porch as she left, her perfume lingering in the hallway. I waited until her car's taillights disappeared, then slowly rose from the chair. My hips still ached, but the pain had become an old companion by then. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the cool, familiar shape of the key I had carried for decades. She hadn't thought to take it from me. Maybe she believed I'd forgotten about it, or maybe she thought I was too broken to use it. Either way, it was still mine. I wrapped my scarf around my neck, pulled on my coat, and stepped out into the cold night. The snow had begun again, light and powdery, whispering under my boots as I walked. Each step was careful, deliberate, but my heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. When I reached the laundromat, I stopped across the street first just to take it in. The building looked smaller than I remembered, hunched in the glow of the street lamp. But to me it was still alive. My place. My work. My years stitched into every inch of it. I crossed quickly, my cane clicking on the icy pavement. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the lock. For a moment I feared it wouldn't turn, that she'd changed it, that I'd truly been locked out. But then with a soft click the door gave way. Inside, the smell hit me at once, soap, starch, and the faint metallic tang of machines that had worked harder than most men I knew. My eyes stung, not from dust but from memory. It was as though the walls themselves welcomed me back. The shop was dim, only the streetlights spilling through the window, casting long shadows across the rows of machines. I moved slowly, running my hand along the counter where I'd tallied thousands of receipts. The old register sat there, silent, as if waiting for me to wake it. I whispered, "I'm home." But I wasn't there to linger. Clara's warning echoed in my ears. She's going to sell it. I needed proof, something that showed Marsha's hand in all this. I started with the office in the back, my sanctuary for years. The door creaked as I opened it, the same creak I'd heard every day at closing time. The desk looked different, too neat, too staged. But I knew how Marsha's mind worked. Neatness was her disguise. I pulled open drawers one by one. Invoices, customer slips, the usual papers. But then, tucked beneath a folder marked supplies, I found it. A stack of documents with her name scrawled across the top. Contracts, bills of sale, agreements, things I had never signed but bore my name nonetheless. My hands shook as I flipped through them. One page listed the machines, each one I'd maintained, polished, coaxed into lasting years longer than they should have. priced like junk to be hauled away. That's when the tears came. Not soft ones but hot, angry tears that blurred the ink. How dares she? To reduce my life's work to numbers on a page, to signatures forged in haste. It was more than betrayal. It was erasure. I pressed the papers to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of toner and dust. They felt heavier than they should, like they carried every year of my labor inside them. And then in the silence I heard it. A soft hum. One of the machines had been left plugged in, its motor barely vibrating. I turned, and there it was, washer 3, my old stubborn companion. I walked over, laid my hand on its warm metal side, and closed my eyes. For a moment, I let the memories wash over me. I remembered Mrs. Alvarez laughing while folding her husband's shirts. I remembered Tommy's grease-stained coveralls. I remembered the little girl who called the laundromat magic during the storm. All of it lived here. And all of it was worth fighting for. When I opened my eyes, I felt steadier, stronger. I gathered the papers, tucking them carefully into my bag, and closed the drawers behind me. Then I turned back to the room, letting my gaze sweep over the rows of machines one last time before slipping out into the night. The cold air slapped my cheeks as I locked the door behind me. The key turned smooth just as it always had. I slipped it back into my pocket and held my bag close, my breath puffing in clouds. I walked home slowly, every step deliberate. My hip ached, my legs wobbled, but I didn't care. I had what I needed. By the time I reached Marsha's house, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. I eased the door open quietly, careful not to wake her, and slipped into the guest room. I laid the papers out on the bedspread, smoothing each one with trembling fingers. There it was, proof. Proof of her lies, her greed, her plan to sell my life for a pittance. Proof that she couldn't take the laundromat from me, not truly, not legally. I sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted but alive in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since my fall, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting. And sweetheart, I knew then, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after my secret return to the laundromat, I laid the papers out on Marsha's spare bed and studied them by the pale light of dawn. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. This was the kind of trembling that comes when a storm gathers inside you. For years I had folded other people's linens, pressed their shirts, kept their clothes spotless. Now I had to press my own case, keep my own future from being soiled. I tucked the stack into a manila envelope, slipped it under my arm, and called a taxi. Marsha thought I was too frail to handle errands, too delicate to walk further than her kitchen. But she had no idea what an old woman with a mission can do. The driver dropped me at a brick building downtown, paint chipped, windows fogged. On the glass door in neat gold letters it read, Freeman and Clark, attorneys at law. I chose them because Mr. Freeman had once been a customer of mine. Every Friday he'd bring in his crisp white shirts, always smiling, always asking after my roses. I prayed he still remembered. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old books. A young receptionist looked up, startled to see me hobbling in with my cane and my envelope. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No, dear," I said, steadying myself. "But tell Mr. Freeman that Mrs. Wilcox from the laundromat is here. He'll know me." And he did. Within minutes, the door to a side office swung open, and there he was, older now, heavier around the middle, but with the same kind eyes. "Mrs. Wilcox," he said warmly, taking my arm. "What brings you here?" I followed him into his office, lowered myself carefully into a leather chair, and placed the envelope on his desk. "Trouble, Mr. Freeman, and I need your help." He opened the envelope and began leafing through the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "These signatures aren't yours," he said at last. "No," I replied firmly. "They are not." He sat back, tapping the papers with his pen. "She can't re-register the business without your authorization. And these bills of sale, they're worthless without your signature. If she's already presented them to anyone, that's fraud. The word cut through me like a blade. Fraud. That's what it was. Not just betrayal. Not just a misunderstanding. A crime. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. Mrs. Wilcox, are you prepared to take this to court? My heart thudded in my chest. Court. The word felt heavy. I'd never stood in a courtroom, never sat before a judge. But then I thought of Clara's whisper, of Tommy's inflated bill, of Mrs. Jenkins handing me forged receipts. I thought of the machines I had coaxed back to life, the customers who trusted me, the life I'd built with my own 2 hands. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I am prepared. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile men give when they see steel where they expected frailty. Good. Then let's get started. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, signatures, statements. Mr. Freeman walked me through every step, patient as a teacher. I sat in his office recounting dates and details, my memory sharp as pins when it came to the laundromat. He told me that would help, that no one could question how deeply I knew the place. Marsha grew restless. She started asking where I went during the day, why I needed taxis. I told her I was visiting friends, and she raised her eyebrows, unconvinced. But I kept my secret close. Let her stew. Finally, the day came. I wore my best navy dress, the one with tiny pearl buttons, and polished my shoes until they shone. My hands shook as I clutched the handle of my cane, but I held my head high. When we entered the courtroom, I could feel the weight of Marsha's glare from across the aisle. She sat straight-backed in her tailored suit, her lips pressed tight, as though she thought sheer posture could erase her deceit. The judge asked for opening statements, and Mr. Freeman stood tall, his voice calm and firm. He spoke of signatures that weren't mine, of documents slipped into drawers, of attempts to sell equipment for far less than it's worth. Then it was Marsha's turn. She painted herself as the dutiful niece, caring for her elderly aunt, taking on responsibility when I supposedly couldn't. Too old. That was her refrain, hidden in every polished word. When it was my turn to speak, my knees trembled as I rose. But once I began, the words flowed like water. I told them about the laundromat, the first coat of paint on its walls, the hum of the machines, the customers who became family. I told them how I'd kept it alive for decades, how I knew every corner better than my own living room. This laundromat is not just a business, I said, my voice clear. It is my life's work. And it cannot be stolen with a forged signature and a clever excuse. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. This was no longer a whisper in a quiet living room. It was truth spoken aloud where it could not be ignored. When I sat down, Mr. Freeman squeezed my hand. Well done, he whispered. I wasn't sure if I had won yet, but I knew one thing. I had stood up. And for a woman who had been told she was too old, too tired, too finished, that was a victory in itself. The courtroom had felt cold, its walls tall and unyielding, the air heavy with formality. But when the people began to arrive, my people, that room warmed like a hearth on a winter's night. I hadn't asked them to come. I would never have presumed. Yet, one by one, familiar faces appeared, taking seats on the benches, their winter coats draped over their arms, their eyes bright with determination. It was as if the laundromat itself had sent them. When the judge called for testimony, Mr. Freeman rose. Your Honor, we have witnesses who would like to speak. The first to take the stand was Clara. She looked small against the high-backed chair, but her voice was steady. She spoke of the years she had worked for me, of how I taught her to balance the books, to care for customers, to treat every shirt and sheet as though it were her own. She told the judge about the whispers she overheard. Marsha planning to sell the machines for next to nothing, dismissing their value, dismissing me. She wanted to erase Mrs. Wilcox, Clara said, her voice cracking. But you can't erase someone who built a place with her own hands. Everyone in this town knows whose laundromat it is. Next came Tommy. He held up one of Marsha's inflated bills, his big hands nearly crumpling the paper. She charged me triple what Mrs. Wilcox ever did. And it wasn't just me, others too. It wasn't right. Mrs. Wilcox always treated us fair. Honest. That place is hers, and she ran it with dignity. The judge listened, nodding slightly. Then Mrs. Alvarez walked slowly to the stand, leaning on her cane. She looked straight at the judge, her voice soft but firm. For 30 years I brought my husband's shirts there. Mrs. Wilcox knew how to bleach them just enough, never too much. It's not just a business, it's trust. And we all trusted her. Marsha never understood that. My throat tightened. I pressed a hand to my lips, trying to hold back tears. But it was the young mother who undid me completely. She shifted her baby gently before speaking. When I was a girl, there was a storm. My family and I had nowhere safe to go. But Mrs. Wilcox opened her laundromat doors. We sat by candlelight, and she gave us warmth, food, and a place to wait it out. I've never forgotten that night. She made us feel safe. She made us feel cared for. That laundromat is hers, it always has been. To us it always will be. Her baby let out a soft cry then, filling the silent courtroom with a sound so innocent it pierced every heart. Even the judge smiled faintly. Marsha shifted in her chair, her face tightening, her polished composure cracking at the edges. She tried to object once or twice, claiming they were just sentimental stories, but the judge waved her off. Stories or not, they carried weight. More weight than any forged paper she had tried to slip past us. And as each person spoke, I felt my spine straighten, my hands grow steadier. It was no longer just my voice against hers. It was a chorus, a whole community reminding the court, and me, that I was not alone. When it was over, Mr. Freeman rose again. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The laundromat belongs to Mrs. Wilcox. The community, her customers, her staff, all stand as witnesses to that truth. The forged signatures, the fraudulent bills, the attempted sale, they cannot undo decades of honest work and ownership. The judge leaned forward, hands folded. His gaze moved from me to Marsha and back again. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint rustle of papers. And then he spoke. It seems to me, he said, that the laundromat has always been and remains Mrs. Wilcox's rightful property. The agreements presented by the niece are annulled. The matter is settled. The words settled over me like a soft blanket. My knees nearly buckled, and I gripped the edge of the table. Beside me, Clara reached for my hand, her eyes shining. I turned to look at the benches. Faces smiled back at me. Familiar, kind, loyal. People who had trusted me with their laundry, yes, but more than that, with their lives, their stories, their small daily burdens. In that moment, I realized something. The laundromat had always been more than a business. It was a thread that bound us together. A quiet corner where trust was folded into every bundle. And my people had reminded me of that. They had given me their voices when mine trembled. The people's voice had carried me. And it had carried the truth. The day the ruling came down, the judge's words still echoing in my ears, Mr. Freeman pressed the keys back into my palm. Cold metal. Familiar weight. I closed my fingers around them, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I thought of all the mornings I'd jingled them in my pocket, all the nights I'd locked up alone, whispering, "See you tomorrow." They weren't just keys, they were proof that I still belonged, that I hadn't been erased. Marsha didn't meet my eyes as she left the courtroom. Her heels clicked sharp against the floor, but her confidence was gone, crumbling like old plaster. I watched her go, and for the first time in weeks, I felt no fear, only a calm I hadn't known I could still carry. When I returned to the laundromat, I stood in the doorway, keys in hand, the scent of soap and starch rising to meet me like an old friend. The machine sat quiet, waiting. I walked in slowly, running my hand along the counter, the walls, the coin slots that had fed my life. I whispered, "We're home." And that's when I understood it wasn't just about the business. It was about saying no for the first time in my life. No to being pushed aside. No to being called too old. No to being forgotten. The keys jingled softly in my hand. My hand. And oh honey, it felt like victory. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.